Before continuing, this episode is a sequel to our first interview with Dr. Jacob Ham, entitled Haunted by History, Love After Trauma. We strongly recommend that you first listen to episode 8, in which we are introduced to a couple that Dr. Ham has been working with and who are struggling with connection in the face of jealousy rooted in childhood wounds and trauma. We are immensely grateful for the courage of this couple who have agreed to let us air their therapy session and believe we all can relate and learn from their work.
We think of anger as like a bad, destructive thing that everyone should learn to control. But there are so many things in the world that deserve outrage and anger and indignation. I think if we replace the word anger with outrage and indignation, we would be more tolerant of it.
Welcome to LOVELINK. We're your hosts, Simone Humphrey and Sina Simon. Dr. Jacob Ham is a clinical psychologist who specializes in working with couples and trauma. He is the director of the Center for Child Trauma and Resilience and assistant clinical professor and supervisor at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. Today he talks to us about trauma and relationships, how we develop certain attachment styles, and what that looks like in romantic relationships. We listen to a sequential therapy session with a couple to help us understand how attachment styles play out in real relationships, destructive ways we respond when we are triggered, and how to use anger effectively. You can learn more from him about attachment, trauma, and emotion from his educational videos and blog on his website, drjacopham.com. We are so excited to welcome back Dr. Jacob Ham. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for joining us again, Jacob.
You're welcome.
It's nice to have you back.
It's nice to be here again.
So last time, in last episode, you introduced us to a couple in which the woman in the couple had a pretty extensive trauma history that impacted how she related to her partner. So she gets easily triggered by her partner, feels threatened that he's going to abandon her. And so she ramps up in the relationship, and he is the one that seems to withdraw more in the relationship. And we didn't talk too much about his trauma history, but certainly he also has his own trauma that he's contending with in the relationship. And so part of what Simone and I have been talking about a little bit is the role of attachment in relationships. So attachment being the emotional bond that we have with our caregivers in childhood that then manifest in adulthood in various ways, because the relationship we have with our parents influences how we think about ourselves in relationship, our expectations of others. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this idea of attachment and how it plays out in relationship, and then maybe we can talk more about how it's playing out for this couple.
Definitely. I think that what you said about attachment being a pattern of relating is absolutely true. And the thing that I would add to that is that the attachment system only gets activated in the context of fear or threat or vulnerability.
So can you quickly take us back to what, in your view, what is attachment? How do you understand attachment? Because I think it's a psychological term that we as psychologists throw around a lot, but
Truly.
The general public maybe hasn't heard before.
I think in the general public sense, attachment is just like whether or not you're bonded to your family. But from psychological research, it's really about like what the child does in reaction to threat. And every small creature moves towards their caregiver whenever they're threatened, because the caregiver's supposed to be the one that protects them. You see this like starting at around a year, whenever children suddenly have stranger anxiety, or even when they're walking around and they meet new people, then they either look towards their parent, or they move a little bit towards their parent, or they just like burrow themselves underneath their parent's leg. It's all a way to regulate the possibility of threat. It became a research topic because a woman named Mary Ainsworth started this research paradigm where she would bring mothers and babies in, and she would ask the mother to leave for a minute and then come back after a short time, and to really see how the baby reacted to it. And it's from that attachment theory arose, where she classified 3 different ways that babies react. The secure baby gets upset when the mother leaves, and then when the mother comes back, then the baby reaches up for the mother for comfort and allows the mother to comfort her. And then there's 2 insecure types of attachment, generally, at least in the beginning of the research. The first one is the avoidant baby that people probably know about. And this baby doesn't look like they care when the mother leaves. And when she comes back, they don't seem flustered at all about the reunion either. And Mary Ainsworth originally thought that these were the healthiest babies because they were just so calm all the time. But it's actually really problematic because they shouldn't be calm when their mother leaves. It's just too dangerous.
And maybe they appear calm, and on the inside they're feeling something different.
That's right. That's the other thing that they found, is that there's a lot of distress underneath that. And then the ambivalently, insecurely attached babies get upset like the secure babies do when the mother leaves. And then when she comes back, she asks to be picked up again, just like a secure baby. But then when she's being held, then she is inconsolable, doesn't allow her mother to console her, and rejects all bids for consolation. And I think there's plenty of like pop videos or material out there about how those can lead to being emotionally avoidant in relationships, or maybe ambivalent. And I guess people think of ambivalent attachment as someone who pursues relationships, but it's way more complex than that, because it's both pursuing it but never really feeling secure in that you have it, and also being so afraid of the risk that you're going to leave that you don't actually like settle into it, and you're either sabotaging the relationship or anticipating that it's going to fall apart. So there's just constant insecurity and dread.
And how do people develop these different attachment styles?
I personally think that it's partly your temperament, like how consolable you come out as a baby. But it really has to do with, some of it I think has to do with whether you're attuned, whether the parents are attuned emotionally to the child's needs and is there for like a good amount of time for them and meets their needs. But then the research also says that there's this thing that Peter Fonagy calls mentalization, which is this idea that the parent wonders about the child's own state of mind. Like, oh, why are you crying? Are you crying because you're hungry? Or is your diaper dirty? What's going on with you? And they try to read their baby's cues constantly, and that state of mind is the most predictive of whether a child has secure attachment.
So being able to hold in mind the mind of another person, and in the case of the parent-child dynamic, it's critical that the parent be able to hold the child in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also in romantic relationships,
exactly.
That's important.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it sounds like when a parent has a hard time mentalizing their child's emotional experience, the baby oftentimes develops this insecure attachment. Does that mean that it also makes it difficult for the child to be able to mentalize towards others? Like, for example, when they become an adult and they're in an adult relationship, do they have a hard time mentalizing the other? And does that reflect part of their attachment style?
That question is like the perfect question to ask, because that's actually the more important legacy of attachment experiences in life. Like, I think that people superficially think that avoidant, like the avoidant attachment style means that you kind of like don't want to be in relationships, but and the ambivalent person may want to, and they're like constantly thinking that you're going to leave them and they're insecure. But the adult attachment research really, like, if anyone's ever tried to learn to code the adult attachment, it's fascinating because it takes about a week I went to Texas to learn how to be an attachment coder. And you basically read an hour-long interview of people talking about their childhoods and their parents. And you don't really code for the types of experiences that they had as a child. You actually code for how they talk about their parents, and the way that they talk. Like, it's super fascinating stuff, and you can see it in therapy. And I think you'll see it in the tapes that we have too.
So for somebody who's securely attached in adulthood versus avoidantly attached in adulthood or anxiously attached, how do you see them talking about their parents, or what are they saying about their parents that's different?
I'll start with the avoidant person. By the way, there's this whole spectrum, and people aren't rigidly one or the other, and people kind of move fluidly through them depending on how safe they feel in the moment or the quality of the relationship that they're in. But the avoidant person generally has a shorter interview. They're not going to use emotion-laden words. Their answers are really short and kind of boring. The people who look like they're secure but are still avoidant do these really subtle things where they give cliched answers like, oh, my childhood was wonderful. I had, piano lessons and violin lessons and all this other good stuff. And you can't really, when you ask them for like details of those memories, they have nothing. And so they use the cliches and the good stories as another way to hide. The other thing that's fascinating as a therapist, perhaps, is that you can feel avoidance because you are either bored in the conversation, you're thinking about other things, you might feel nervous and you don't know why, or you kind of don't like that person for some reason. You're just not drawn to them. Their stories are really uninteresting. So once your heart is attuned to this, you can really pick up on attachment styles immediately.
It sounds like in the avoidant attachment, people don't feel safe to explore a negative emotion at all.
Exactly.
Whereas secure people probably would feel safe to explore all the things.
Right. The best example is that a secure person can have a really terrible childhood. And if you ask them about a memory of their childhood, then they might say it always makes me upset when I think about this. And so they're super aware of their own emotional response to their memories. And then they might say something like, I'll just tell you the highlights of what happened. No, I won't go into the gory details or something like that.
Is the avoidant person conscious of avoiding?
No, absolutely not. I don't think anyone is conscious of what they're doing when they're doing it, when stress levels are high and vulnerability is high.
So in some ways, avoiding is probably a pretty good protective way to avoid painful feelings.
Absolutely.
What are the consequences?
Well, I want to reiterate that the avoidant and the ambivalent attachment styles are still adaptations to certain kinds of parenting. So they are still supposed to be positive. It's the way, the avoidant baby is trying to keep their mother close by not causing too much drama for their mother. They're like, okay, I'll be calm. I'll take care of you. Look, I'll just do a good job of being a good little boy or whatever. And that way you're going to still love me. The ambivalent baby is saying, sometimes you're there, sometimes you're not. So I'm going to just keep yelling and screaming to kind of get you to take care of me. I'm not going to give up on this. But I'm also scared that you're going to keep doing this. So it worries me. The ones that I've seen in my office don't think that it's distressing. They just avoidant people show up in my practice because their partners are insisting that they come, or their children are having issues and they just want me to fix their children. They're like, my life is fine. I have this guy who his wife asked him how their marriage was, and he's like, it's great. We never fight. I have a routine that I like. I do this every week. I do the same thing, and it feels really good. Our children are healthy and grown. It's good. And she herself is so painfully depressed and so alone in the relationship. And she's given up on trying to reach him. he knows that she's depressed, but he can't grasp the depth of it, and that it's caused by his inability to connect with her on an emotional level.
Yeah, the avoidant people are very emotionally disconnected.
In addition, I think, to temperament and parenting, also, as you're talking about this patient of yours, that there's a certain element of like socialization and culture
Right.
that also kind of
Definitely.
probably influences attachment style. And as you talk about this male patient, men in our society are oftentimes socialized not to express emotion, to avoid. And so it probably lends itself more commonly in men to have this avoidant style as well.
Yeah, and I think that the research showed that Japanese people have a higher rate of avoidant attachment something like that.
Last night I was reading more about different attachment styles, and I'd read about these 4 different attachment styles in adulthood, and I really think it's interesting to think about the distinction between fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance in adulthood. That even within the avoidant attachment style, there are these 2 forms of avoidance. So in the fearful avoidant person has a negative view of self and other. So they seek intimacy, but they believe that they are inadequate, and they also believe that they will be rejected in relationships. So it's very dysregulating for them once they actually do get close to another person. But they want it. They know they want it. They're conscious of wanting a relationship. But then once they get too close, they back away. Versus the dismissive person, which I think is what you were speaking to, is a person who actually has a lot of self-esteem themselves, and they have a pretty positive view of themselves, but still a belief that they will be rejected by the other, or perhaps abandoned by the other. So the way that they operate is that they, will talk about being very independent and not needing another person.
It's almost like rationalizing themselves out of the relationship.
Right. And like their need for intimacy is more at an unconscious level, and maybe like manifests in other ways that are less explicit.
I think one of the insights that I had that I don't think I've ever read anywhere is that the avoidant people sublimate their need for relationship in recognition through achievement. So they want to be admired from a distance. So they get the same kind of, it feels like love, and through praise feels like love, but it's a weak approximation of it.
So what about the preoccupied, anxious people? What happens there?
Their interviews are really fascinating. Their interviews go on and on and on. See, the way that you code the attachment interview is actually whether or not they violate norms of conversation. And so the preoccupied person will talk too long, they will ramble, they will go off topic, they just forget that you're in front of them. That's the most important thing. The way that I can understand it is that in your head, when like vulnerability gets triggered, then there's almost this psychic reaching out towards your mom to make you feel better. And that immediately generates both yearning but anger. And then there's also the avoidance that kicks up. And so that avoidance gets thrust onto the conversational partner so that the interviewer is no longer present. And they've disconnected from you, but in their head they're reaching for their mother, and so their brain just like loses track of what's happening in the moment. The other way that I really look at ambivalence is the notion of hide and seek that I happened to read in some New York Times article that a psychotherapist had written, but it actually was she was quoting the work of Winnicott, who had said, I don't remember if I said this in my last podcast.
Yeah, I think you did.
Yeah.
But it's a great quote.
The quote that I had mentioned in the prior podcast about like where Winnicott says it's a joy to be hidden and a disaster not to be found.
Yeah.
I just keep seeing that happen in therapy constantly, where people make angry bids for connection, but through the anger, the bid becomes misunderstood, and then they feel devastated that the bid's not received, and then they feel like it becomes self-fulfilling that see, you don't really love me because you can't see through my anger and see that I really am just asking for you to like apologize or take care of me or something like that.
My therapist said that to me once. She quoted Winnicott. I thought that was a very profound quote.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of devastating.
It's devastating.
It's so sad. Yeah, the
Really
preoccupied attachment is incredibly painfully sad.
So let's listen to some of this clip of a couple that you've been seeing and that we listened to last time and talk a little bit about their attachment styles.
Basically, my impression is she sees these things that belong to past girls, and it makes her question her status as the girlfriend, and if there's going to be continuity in that relationship here, and could she turn out to be one of the many girls that
she's going to be knickknacks in your drawers.
Yeah.
Right, and
I find it really hard to believe that is not the case. I can't believe it.
Okay.
Whoa, you can't.
I mean, no, I couldn't believe that, that I wouldn't end up that my things will become orphans and I would become
You think he's like some kind of bone collector?
I don't want to be your souvenir.
Got it.
I'm done being somebody's souvenir.
Right, but do you see how unfair that is? To assume that that's what's going on?
That is unfair to assume and I said that I'm sorry I feel this way. It's unfair because that he's shown by action that it's not as such, but it still makes me feel that way.
But that doesn't mean that he's responsible for fixing the way you're feeling if you're being unfair. If he's done everything in his power to show you that that's not the case, and yet you still punish him for it.
Well, he didn't do everything per se because he just left over.
But if you're gonna condemn him for one act of omission,
it's not one though.
It's such a benign thing. It's a careless, thoughtless act that would require tremendous. I think it would require him going through everything he owns to look for every knickknack when it's not worth it. When
he doesn't own the Metropolitan Museum.
The thing that is worth it is to keep giving you love, not to get rid of knickknacks. To plan.
Yeah, I think exactly to your point. In my mind, I'm of course, I agree that yes, that these things should not be there. And I try to make them not be there. Of course, I've not been successful 100%, and there's been straggling pieces.
And that part you apologize for,
I apologize. Too. I acknowledge that's been an issue. But in my mind, I'm man, I'm sure I've done everything I can. I've shown so much love, and yet she questions and works with this under this base case scenario that she could be one of them, and
exactly.
that the love there may or may not be, or that she could just be a souvenir. To me, that's really hurtful because I'm that's
it cheapens your love for her.
Right. It exactly. So then that makes me upset, and
it should. So then, I feel like I should kind of set the stage for what we're going to dive into. I think last time there was an iPad, and she had seen old photos of him with his ex-girlfriend or something, and that had triggered a fight. Well, that's just been a recurring theme in our therapy sessions. And I think that in the sessions that you see, she's extremely upset because she found new stuff. He apparently left a dress or something, right? He apparently left a dress in the closet, and she saw it, and so then it triggered her into thinking that, we couldn't tell what it triggered her into, but she felt the need to punish him severely for it, that there was still more residual stuff from other girlfriends.
What do you think was going on for her internally as you were having that conversation about the items from past girlfriends? What was her mentalization process?
There was no mentalization process. She had been fully triggered into a state that I didn't understand for the first session. The sessions that we have with us is one where she just completely loses it and berates him for the whole session, and I get activated and I'm fighting her the whole time. And then I think the second session is where some of the revelations and insights come in, the gist of what she says is, do you remember? I think some of it was like, part of it is that she doesn't want to be just another souvenir in his apartment. Seeing that stuff, I think it must just viscerally feel threatening. Like if you see another person's stuff in your partner's life still, it's got to just biologically trigger some kind of possessiveness and jealousy. But then she sees it as he's gonna two-time her, like other women's presence keeps sneaking into their relationship somehow, even through these small items. So it must trigger some territorialness, but she never talks about that.
Abandonment fears.
That's what she primarily talks about, is like, you're gonna leave me, aren't you? Like, I'm gonna become another trinket in your drawer. The other thing that is happening is that, and she doesn't talk about this clearly or openly in front of him until much later, and I force her to, is that she's projecting her own pattern of relationship onto him, because of her ambivalent attachment style. She keeps guys in rotation. She had, before him, she had a history of seducing men to like her, so that she feels like that she's desirable and that they like her. But then she would keep them at a distance and immediately rotate to another guy if it got awkward or intense.
Yeah, I think the word that she describes them as are losers.
Right.
These losers.
Right.
Yeah, and I was curious about that, whether she kind of thought they were losers and meaningless, or if she kind of objectified them.
Yes, both.
Both.
Yeah, exactly. She almost did like a male strategy, where she would just like collect all these men as a way to just feel like someone wants her, but still like she would have power over them because they liked her more than she liked them.
Wait, why is that a male strategy?
Because you hear about guys who are like just like getting notches on their bedpost. Like she was, in a way, just like getting notches as a way to feel desirable in that sense.
Well, and one thing I noticed too that I imagine was really difficult was that she wanted to hear from her partner that these women were meaningless so that they wouldn't be threatening for her. And yet by him saying that he doesn't have feelings for them anymore, or that they aren't meaningful, also reinforced this idea that she would then be one of them. Like it seemed to be caught in both of these difficult positions.
I know.
It's almost like she wanted it to just implode. Like
she did.
She wanted it to just be a total disaster, just to confirm her worst fears about.
That's exactly what's happening.
The relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
She was so distressed that it was almost like she was in a state of panic. It didn't really matter what the reasoning or rationale was.
There was no reasoning or rationale. And you see her constantly switching about what she's really upset about. The core thing that she gets at eventually, which I really thought was essential, was that she felt like if she feels pain, then it's his job to fix it. It doesn't matter whether it's justified or reasonable or not. He needs to do everything in his power to fix it. But she's not letting him, which is the push and pull, the hide and seek of the ambivalent attachment. Like, I'm going to keep, like, the mom's trying to pick you up, but yet you're going to still protest and never let that be comforting to you.
So going back to the spreadsheet, so on Thursday,
I mean, this is like,
so
everyone is saying that
iPad.
it's my fault. It's not my fault.
No one's saying anything.
But you're kind of saying like it's my fault. No, actually, like let me be like more specific. Like you're kind of saying like your way is the good way and my way is the bad way.
No, he's not.
No. It makes me feel like you're saying that your way is the good way because you're like friends with all the people you've
No. That's you. No. You can't. No. That's you taking it the worst way possible when he's not saying that.
I feel like
it was a moment of trying to beg you to see him as being innocuous.
Okay, I see it.
No, you're not.
Okay, then don't take it the wrong way and spend it your own fucking way.
Okay.
Like, I'm really fucking pissed off now.
I am too. It's totally unfair to you.
Okay, it's all my fault. No one gets angry. No one get angry.
Stop. Like,
No,
it
get
only
angry.
reaches this point where she pushes me over the edge, and then she's like, "Oh no, I'm sorry,
I didn't.
No, now you're fucking all like, oh,
Yeah, you
I'm
can't
fucking
do that.
Rosie
No,
Daisy.
I'm not
No.
Rosie Daisy. I'm Dead Daisy.
And what seems to be playing out for him internally? Because he seemed to me kind of, I don't know, he, at least in some of the session, I guess it's the first session, he's quite calm, collected, quite rational. He's listening. He's not getting upset. And I was like, what is going on with him? I don't know what is he feeling? I couldn't
tell if he was calm or paralyzed. But he was quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, more like deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
Because she runs over him. Like, she constantly interrupts him. Whenever he does try to respond, he's just like backpedaling, it feels like.
Yeah, paralyzed is more the
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
And see, I think that his mentality is like, let's just be calm all the time. Let's always just have happiness. That's his life. That's his approach to life.
So would you say he fits into an avoidant attachment style?
Yeah, but he would slip by a lot of people as secure. Because he's one of those super close to being secure looking, because he's listening attentively, he's trying to like take her perspective, but it's such a cerebral, rational thing, and emotionally he's probably in panic or paralyzed or just numb. I kept getting more activated than he did, because whenever you're in the room with them, you see how he's floundering and she's berating him, and I can't abide by that kind of like injury happening in the session. And so I try to stop it as much as I can. And I also try to speak up on his behalf because he kept not doing it. And then I would notice that I'm doing it. And then I would say, like, do you want to talk? Aren't you pissed? Don't you want to be the one to do this? And then he would just be flustered. And so I felt like I had to carry that for him.
Something we really value at LOVELINK is the ability to tune into our partners. This can be incredibly challenging between work, friends, television, and everything else life throws at us. It is completely natural to feel distracted and forget to focus in on the person we love most. Non is a sound meditation app for the iPhone that can help facilitate slowing down and connecting. Spelled N-O-N, it comes from the concept of non-duality, meaning not divided, oneness. What makes the Non app unique is that it isn't a collection of pre-recorded music. Instead, Non produces each sound note by note, making no two sessions ever alike. This lack of familiarity means you can approach each session unclouded by expectation, forever keeping your attention purely in the moment. Set the timer, sit with your lover, and meditate. Download Non today in the iPhone App Store. Can you talk to us a little bit about your own emotional experience in the room with them?
And even how your own attachment style is manifesting in the session.
Okay. Let's start with that then. I guess I started as extremely avoidant in my lifetime. I don't think I cried as a kid, and one time in high school I think I almost cried, and I was like, oh, this is fascinating, I wonder what this is. And I think there was a death. Intellectualizing it. Yeah, I think there was a death, and I felt like whoa, like I think I'm supposed to cry here, but I don't feel like it. I wonder what's going on. And it was only after like severe loss and pain, and then 4 years of really good therapy and other kinds of healing, that the floodgates of emotionality opened up, and I can't close it anymore. And like I cried everything. And I think that I've earned my secure attachment status through that. Meaning that except when I'm like at redlining at like a 9 or so, I'm pretty aware of what's happening in me as well. And especially when I'm being a therapist, then I'm intentionally like amping up my capacity to mentalize, not like if I'm at home with my partner, then I might not have that capacity for mentalization up as much. So as it relates to this session, I think that my own attachment pattern, my historical avoidance style, didn't feel as present because I was actively doing the fighting. I feel like with avoidant people, like with this guy, you have to get them to start fighting for relationships.
Do you think maybe you understood him more because you've had the experience of being more in an avoidant style? Like you don't see him as a secure person. You recognize that he has these avoidant patterns. And I mean, we're speaking about these in, pretty black and white terms, and obviously it's on a spectrum, but I wonder if you have a different understanding of him than maybe somebody who's not familiar with that way of relating to people.
I think actually it's not my style, but it's the training that I got in that week of like coding the interviews that makes me attuned to these moments. In other kinds of psychotherapy research, they talk about ruptures in the relationship, and it's really fascinating that you can feel when there's a rupture, and the ruptures are either avoidance, like withdrawal ruptures, or aggressive ruptures, and you can just see them in the moment because if your heart is open and like flowing with what's happening between people, then we all have very similar reactions to like poignant moments. And whenever the reaction is different from what my heart anticipates it's going to be, then I feel like I can tell that there's some kind of move away from something. Oh, I had another profound experience. I had this father who was severely abused, and he loves his daughter, and she comes in for therapy, and he came in on her behalf because he loves her so much. And he said something to me that highlights this. He said, I've been really verbally abusive to my daughter. And then the next thing I thought he would say was, and that devastates me. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I recreated the abuse that I promised I swore that I would never hurt my children, and I did it again. And maybe not physically, but verbally, I devastated them just as much as my parents did me physically. And instead he said, I might have hurt my daughter, but that's nothing compared to what I got.
Wow.
And he and I got into a fight at some point in that therapy session. And then at some point we got out of it and we're like, what's going on between us? And we were able to get him back calm. And I needed to, at some point I think I said, what's going on? Where are you at emotionally? He goes, I'm not feeling anything. And then I start to break down what he was doing and how he was posturing with me. And I got him to this place where he started to tear up a little bit, and that's as emotional as he's ever been, apart from with his wife. I said, that's where you need to be. You need to be in a place where you're really hurting about this, and it's gonna suck. I have to warn you, it's gonna be one of the most painful things you ever endure, but it's the only path to get to reclaim your attachment and your heart and be able to be a good dad to her. And he's willing to do it. And it's like the most, that's when my attachment stuff kicks in, because whenever I see someone, especially a man, doing this hard work of overcoming their trauma and learn to reconnect emotionally, then I just feel such admiration and love for them in that moment.
And I think what you're speaking to also really showed up in this session with her and her inability to kind of imagine the pain that he experienced when she was berating him, or even to acknowledge. I mean, there was a moment when you ask her, what's something positive? And she starts to describe this dinner with her and her mom and her partner, and completely gets derailed and just talks about her difficult relationship to mom.
Exactly.
That it's hard to see outside of her suffering because she's struggling so much.
Exactly. That was supposed to be a lovely moment, and I brought up a positive thing to kind of activate prefrontal cortex and like all the positive things in their relationship. But as soon as the word mom was said, then her ambivalent attachment kicked in, and she went on a digression about her mother. And I just laughed at it because I saw it happening, and I made her aware of the fact that she wasn't answering the question anymore. And then we went back. That's like a classic example of a preoccupied state of mind.
it's like to me that was like God turning water into wine. It was like a miraculous because like number one, like I was just so mortified because like I don't know how to act around her, and like I can't please her. So in that part I'm always kind of in my head, it's just like, oh my god, like I need to like not get my mom pissed. Like my mom just like yesterday, she was like, I'm sick. Anyways, like so it's like my mom, and then so it's like, you know, like I'm her own daughter. I'm not good enough. So it's like nothing can make her happy. So I'm looking after my mom's feelings as I always am.
So why do you think it was so important for her partner, this man, to express his anger or show assertiveness in the relationship?
Because I knew it came from a good place. See, I think that we do such a disservice to anger. We think of anger as like a bad, destructive thing that everyone should like learn to control. But there are so many things in the world that deserve outrage and anger and indignation. I think if we replaced the word anger with outrage and indignation, we would be more tolerant of it. So I know for a fact that this man loves her, more than she's ever done to deserve. He just loves her. He can't explain it, and he's so good to her, and he tolerates her whenever she like has these meltdowns. And so when she's accusing him of not loving him and not taking care of her, then I feel outrage for him, and he should feel outrage to fight for the truth of how much love there is in their relationship. I think what I often say to patients is like, we think of anger as like fighting against, and that's whenever it's bad because it's trying to destroy other people. But if you're fighting for something, then that's whenever you're using anger the right way. And so I want him to be fighting for the truth of how much he loves her, to like interrupt her preoccupied attachment style. And I'm saying preoccupied because in the adult attachment literature, they use the word preoccupied instead of ambivalent.
And anger can also be useful in that it gives us good information. If we're feeling angry, it's telling us that something is wrong. So to ignore it does an incredible disservice and doesn't move things forward.
Absolutely.
In a relationship or politically or whatever it is, right?
And I think both of them really showed these two different spectrums of anger. One, which was completely unboundaried, her anger. You're responsible for my anger, versus him, which was like overly boundaried and not expressing it.
And I'd also say that anger, it signifies that something's wrong, that something needs to be fixed, something needs to be protected. It can also signify that something really important and meaningful is happening right now. That some value of yours that you really care about is being threatened in some way, or it's being activated in a way that you want to live it.
So a lot of couples believe that anger is destructive in the relationship and that fighting is destructive to the relationship. And so showing anger, and then engaging in any kind of conflict is going to be bad. And sometimes come to therapy being like, oh, we're fighting too much and we need to stop fighting. We need to not fight at all, as if that is the model of a successful relationship. And I'm curious what you have to say about that, because it sounds like you're saying anger is useful, can be useful.
And it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Because it stems from hurt or misunderstanding or some moments of neglect. I think that there's no way that we can do right by our partner all the time. In psychology, we always talk about the good enough mother, that a good enough mother isn't one who's always right and attuned perfectly. It's actually unhealthy. It's a sign of anxiety and helicopter parenting and all that. a good enough mother does her best, but then she has her own needs, and so she kind of like takes care of herself every once in a while and puts herself first. And then you have to negotiate that. Everyone's needs are fluid, and sometimes they sync and sometimes they don't. And anger sometimes is a way to signify that one of your needs isn't being met, or you're being hurt because of the other person in some way. And that you need to tell that to the other person, because how else are they going to fix that unless they know?
So moving forward with this couple, I mean, how would you help, I guess, him to access anger in a way that's productive and them to communicate in a way that can get through this?
That's a really good way to ground the question about like how to help couples through anger. It's like, how do I help this couple become angry or control anger? With him, I would slow things down, because that whole like deer in the headlights paralysis thing that happens to him means that his brain is just like disappearing from us. And so we have to slow it down to like let his brain like feel safe enough to come back. And then I would have him really think about all the times that he's done loving things for her, and feel like, oh my God, I'm so good to her. I don't deserve to be treated like this at all. This is not fair to me at all. I want him to be able to feel that, like, this isn't fair. Don't you see how much I do for you? So like if he's coming from that state of like, I know how much I love you, so no, I'm not gonna let you let your like past interfere with our relationship. So if you can also sometimes realize that your anger isn't meant to hurt the other person, but meant to protect their love from her trauma that's being triggered in her, then it feels like he's using his anger on their behalf. So that can help reframe the anger.
Is that when you talk about purpose? Exactly. And getting in touch with your values, it seems like that's what it aligns with.
Yeah. And psychologists hate saying it, but it all boils down to just feeling like we're loved and we can love other people. I know like we don't ever want to use those words as researchers and academics, but that's what it comes down to. Oh, another fascinating thing about him is that when he does access anger, the only anger that he can feel in touch with is, I'm sick and tired of this happening, which to me is actually his avoidance kicking in, saying, don't ruffle feathers, don't make things bad. So he still needs to work on like tapping into the right kind of like just anger is what I call it, like in terms of justice and like feeling like he's right to be angry about this. And with her, I would help her to mentalize. The preoccupied mind loses touch with what's happening in the moment and gets lost in their own pain and their own anticipation of pain. And so I wish that I could just like shake her into the present, to be like, wake up, what's really happening in front of you? It's not your mom in front of you. Look at this guy. Look at all he's done for you. It's like trying to wake the Hulk from like being destructive. And it's like, what's really going on here? And that's really hard to do. And that's been the work. Like what you don't see in the audio is that I kick her sometimes whenever she's interrupting him, and I'm like non-verbally lecturing her to like pay attention to him. I constantly chide her to like, no, stop, listen to him. And then she's like compliantly like, okay, I'll listen, and then she'll try to do it. I also sometimes try to get her to mentalize herself and to understand what's really underneath the rage that she's feeling. And then every once in a while, she'll say something that's really poignant. And I think she needs to start there, because she's had such a lifetime of being neglected that she doesn't have the generosity or her cup isn't filled enough to be able to give to another person. So she needs to learn to like understand her own rage and her own pain in a compassionate way first. And then like kind of like love herself and like heal that for herself, and then I think she'll be able to do that for the other person.
It's a lot of work, and I hope in time before
it's going to take years,
he leaves her, because I mean I think that's the fear when you listen to this, is that if he can only take so much, will she be able to do it in a way that's fast enough?
And that is exactly why I'm willing to fight her, because I want this relationship to work so bad, whenever she does something that I know is outrageous, I like, you cannot do that. Like that whole like Excel thing. She texted me a snapshot of this list of ex-girlfriends and their attributes and why he liked them. And I said, like, what the fuck are you doing? Did you rifle through his stuff? Does he know that you found this stuff? I said, you cannot do that to him. And I was so angry at her. And she was defensive for a little while. And then at some point, she's like, but I feel hurt. He's hurting me. I said, you need to stop reacting to your feelings and prioritizing them, because your feelings betray you. And then like 10 minutes later, she said, that's the most profound thing you could have said to me. And she snapped out of it when she realized that her feelings weren't the truth, that they shouldn't drive her reality.
Well, it's like that would be painful for anybody to come across the list like that.
I know.
Really.
I know, but she dug deep.
But it sounds like her response just gets so extreme that it becomes destructive. Rather than being able to say to her partner, listen, I found this list. It's really painful for me. Can we talk about this? It's like, fuck you. I don't even know what happens. I can only imagine the explosion that she would.
And that she's finding reasons to leave him. She's actually searching for them.
She's sabotaging.
I mean, this is why when you're starting a relationship, you don't ask about prior relationships right away, because it's going to immediately trigger a threat. And you have to respect that people have had lives before they met you. And so she wasn't doing that. I mean, she went through his computer to find this thing.
You know what, we're talking about anger and how anger shows up in this couple. And also I just want to kind of comment that anger also shows up for you too in the room, and that she's able to kind of handle it quite well, given that you're not only her couples therapist or in these sessions her couples therapist, but also her individual therapist, and how many people might have really reacted very negatively to their therapist kind of yelling at them. And so I'm curious what your stance is on expressing anger to your patients, and with this couple specifically, or this woman.
I model the use of anger for the purpose of fighting for relationships, for better healthiness, for keeping traumatic reactions at bay. It doesn't always work, but I warn people that I can be rough. And I try to always explain why I do it. And whenever I know I do it poorly, I feel really bad about it. You know that from the way I am in supervision. Like, I'm constantly apologetic because I just can't do it without hurting.
It's very powerful, though, because I think there's great value. In a sense, it's taking sides. You're taking a stance, or taking a stance. You have a stance. And sometimes many people we've talked to, assume that therapy, couples therapy, assume that their couples therapist will be a neutral observer to help foster intimacy, but won't really take a stance.
Or sides.
Yeah. And you do that. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your decision to take sides, and when you decide to take sides.
I'm so purpose-filled about, I'm here to protect and foster this relationship. So whenever I feel like there's an injury or a miscommunication that's leading to injury, then I immediately have to I'm like the goalie for the relationship from being hurt. And so I just jump in. I'm like, you can't do that. And I don't know how else to do it. So this is my own crudeness comes out just because I'm like working so fast and so spontaneously. I'm like, that hurt. You got to do that over again. The way you just look at the way she just reacted, that you just hurt her. You can't do that. And most people they allow me to do it because they give me some authority as their therapist to do that. And their intention is to get better too. And so they're like, help us. I definitely don't think that I could do that in front of my friends or something like that. And so I'm always incredibly grateful at my patient's own generosity to let me be crude. So it's really not, I don't feel like I personally am that like miraculous at doing things. I just am willing to take the risk of doing things for the sake of their relationship. And then my patients just like tolerate who I am as a person.
Authority.
And when you make it clear that your interventions are always for the stance of the relationship,
right.
It is kind of a neutral stance, even if it looks like you're taking one side versus another, because of course you're holding people accountable for their behaviors and calling them out for it. But it seems like every time you do it, it's because you're trying to protect the relationship between the two of them. One thing when I was listening to this tape is that I initially thought that he was a very securely attached individual that was just tolerating a lot of his partner's frustrations and kind of like past attachment injuries. And I was surprised that he was still with her. And then slowly as the session unfolded, it became clear he was a little more avoidant, that he had his own kind of attachment history, his own traumas that were playing into this, and wondered whether these two very different attachment styles are in some ways drawn to each other for different types of reasons. And maybe if you could speak a little bit about just different attachment styles and the way that they can play into each other, sometimes in constructive ways and other times in destructive ways.
I want to start by honoring the truth of his attempt to like be an attentive partner to her. So there is a truth to his secureness. My sense of him, what I'm going to say is more hypothetical because I haven't worked with him enough to have him confirm that my hypotheses are correct. But my working hypotheses for him for now is that he played a different role in his family than she did. His role was to be the sunshine in everyone's life. He is the male of the family, and in his culture, he has profound pain that he has still not... I don't know, but I imagine because his mother is incredibly ill throughout his whole life, and he barely saw her. So she was missing from his life, and I would imagine that he yearned for her, but he was raised by his grandparents. But I haven't gotten that sense that he's yearning for her or he feels lost from it. Yet. And then he has a sibling who also is very ill. And so he has to play this role of being the one good thing in the family's life, the one hope. And he's an incredibly successful, like smart, good-looking guy. And I think there's no room for him to feel bad. But he's not suffering from it either because he likes this role. And it feels good. He's a pretty happy, happy-go-lucky guy. So his avoidance is super slippery. It's only whenever there's real distress. He might be really good at taking care of another person's distress, like what you're seeing, because of his role of being a caretaker to his family. But I don't know if he would ask for help whenever he's upset or reach out whenever he's upset.
But have you noticed, like, it requires
I know.
her to push me over the edge.
I know.
And then she's like, oh, okay. Like,
I know. It's suddenly it's like steps. Yeah.
I fucked them over. Oh,
right.
let me
I
come
never
now.
fuck you over.
It's just like it's not an active thought. It's like this underlying thing that it's like it's.
That's why I feel like that you should change your strategy and don't be apologetic and just be furious from the get-go.
But it's not even a strategy. Like, that's just like how I am. So it's like, so then I need to change how I normally react to things. But
I think that's good for you.
No, but that's tiring. It's like fake. It's tiring. Like, I can't do that.
I think it's actually that. I think you being a peacemaker is a defense. And you being pissed is more honest and more liberating and freer and less energy if you just be you. Be offended that she's treating you this way from the get-go.
So do you think his history is contributing to him staying in the relationship?
Yes, but this is pure psychobabble, and I don't know if it's going to become a truth in our work if we ever work together. My psychobabbly theory is that he's trying his current girlfriend is like 1 degree, like a mom dot 2, like slightly better than his mom. Like there's a hope that he can reach her, whereas his mother was completely unreachable. There's a chance that if he's a good enough son, a loving enough person, that he can somehow get the other person to recognize him and love him back.
So he can, if he's able to do that, he can repair some childhood wound that he had with his mother. Yeah. My worry with a couple like this and other couples I've seen where one person is more traumatized than the other, has more insecure attachment, is that the secure person is going to eventually burn out.
I know.
And it just, I see that happening again and again. And something, I wonder about is ultimately couples where both are traumatized, do they do better sometimes? Or should a person who's been very traumatized seek a securely attached person at the risk of them burning out? Yeah,
that makes sense. And the truth is that at this moment in time, when we're doing this interview, they are broken up. He finally had enough. She did one more thing that was unforgivable in my eyes, and I told her that it was unforgivable. And he said, "I've had enough."
No.
Yeah. And it was so painful for him. And he tried to break up many times.
What did she do?
She wouldn't let go of another example of a souvenir thing.
So it was the same pattern.
Yeah, but it was at a time when he is under a lot of duress because a family member is ill. And so he really needs to like have someone who's going to be there for him, and she brought it up at the worst time.
How's she doing?
Devastated. It was profound though. She came in and she said things that I felt so raw and authentic. It was like a secure person. It was like so painful what she apologized to me for like not listening, for letting her emotions take over, for not paying attention to his own pain. And then she apologized to me for how hard it must have been for me to sit through their sessions. So she was mentalizing me as well.
It also makes me think of the first session that we listened to, where she says something like, it would be a relief if you finally left me, because I'm in so much pain all the time. So on the one hand, I hear how has a lot of insight. On the other, I wonder if it's also a relief for her because this is what she's been anticipating for so long.
Yeah, and wishing because it's so painful. And
But then the hope is that she eventually can move past that to be able to have a relationship, because she wants it so badly and it's getting in the way.
Yeah, she deserves it too. And I guess I just take such a long view that I feel like every relationship is just like self-improvement. So I think she took a huge step. This was her first real relationship, and I can't imagine how painful this is, and it triggers my own memories of like my first heartaches and how painful they were and how crazy and stupid I was. But I wouldn't be able to love the way I do today without having endured the pain that I experienced when I was younger. And it's harder for younger adults to understand, take the long view and to see how this is all part of the maturation process, even though it's so painful.
So is it possible for someone who's insecurely attached to move into a more secure attached stance?
I think so. I did myself, and a lot of my patients do. And it's not that I'm that much different from who I was to begin with, but I'm more authentically who I am moment to moment, and more aware of my limitations and the impact that it has on people. So it's more about like cultivating mindful awareness, like that whole mentalizing thing, that is coupled with a deep sense of like compassion for my own foibles and limitations as a human being, and the fact that everyone I'm going to meet has the same level of imperfection, and that we're just going to keep like mucking through. I think that's the ideal of life, is just to keep mucking through.
And a good reminder.
Yeah. And it's a relief to know that everyone's mucking through.
Right. Even the securely attached individual still has their mucking around and still gets triggered and still becomes insecurely attached in moments. It would be unnatural never to have that experience.
Even secure people can feel overwhelming pain, rejection, heartache, loss, and all of that. And it's gonna do crazy things to you. And you just have to like allow crazy times to have crazy reactions. Try to weather them with the person you love.
Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me again. That was fun.
Yeah. Come back soon.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and thanks for listening. We also want to thank Point in Passing for their original music and website design. Be sure to subscribe to LOVELINK on iTunes and leave us a review. And check out our upcoming workshops for singles and couples on lovelink.co. See you next time.
Mm-hmm.